This is the Plagmanrules Podcast, and we are up to episode number 8. And today is Monday, it's July 10th. And so on today's podcast, we're going to take a look at what happened at the weekend box office. And I also have a review for Baby Driver. We're just going to have those two subjects today. Last episode kind of went over on time, so this one we're going to try to kind of even it out a little bit, and today's episode will be a little bit shorter. Okay, so first of all, we'll get to the box office report from the weekend. On Friday's episode, I had a review for Spider-Man Homecoming. That easily won the weekend box office, by the way. $117 million opening weekend. Now, the big question is this enough? Is this a big enough number? Well, when you consider that $117 million is not only the second biggest opening weekend for any film in the Spider-Man franchise, but when you also take into consideration that this is the third Spider-Man film in the space of 5 years, then yeah, I think that's a great opening. Absolutely great opening. And then on top of it, it's part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, so that definitely gets a lot of interest in the film. And yeah, off of Civil War, everybody was interested to see what Spider-Man would do next. I think it's a really great start for the movie. It also happens to be the 5th biggest opening of all time for any July release. Now, I don't know if we're going to have another film this month open higher to this. I doubt that Apes will get past 100 million. Maybe if, Pie in the Sky, maybe it gets to 75 million and kind of gets close to Dawn of the Planet of the Apes numbers. But right now, tracking on that one for next weekend looks pretty low, actually, about mid-50s range. Dunkirk, I'm starting to have my doubts if Dunkirk will actually be all that great a movie. It's got Christopher Nolan attached to it, so that's one thing to consider there. But also the fact that it's a war movie opening in the middle of July, when it feels more like it should be like an Oscar contender movie opening in November. Plus the fact that you have Valerian dealing with it, which Valerian won't be a huge hit here in the States, I don't think. Maybe opens to 25 million. Dunkirk, right now they're saying will open somewhere between 30 and 50 million. I'm more leaning on the side of like 40 to 45. And then after that, we've got like Atomic Blonde opening. That probably 30 million is going to be the pie in the sky number there. The more realistic numbers is more along the 20 to 25 million range for that one as well. So Spider-Man Homecoming, I think, will be easily the biggest opening of the month. I can also mention here that worldwide, it's just a little over 250 million. Actually, it's a little bit lower than I thought it would be. The foreign box office wasn't really into it as much as I thought. I was expecting more along the lines of, maybe I said 117 for my prediction, actually, so I'm right on this week. But I was thinking it would have done, 117 here, maybe closer to 180 or 190 overseas, closer to 300 million worldwide for the opening, and then it could clear its path to get to close to $1 billion by the end. I don't know. Next weekend, Apes comes out, and overseas, I don't know if Apes is going to do all that well. It's not a huge draw for the overseas market. It's kind of more of a domestic kind of film. It'll take a chunk out of Spider-Man's box office there overseas, but I still think Spider-Man will be number one again next weekend at the overseas box office. Then after that, we have Dunkirk and Valerian, which Dunkirk I think will do really well in Europe, probably not so well in Asia, kind of those markets. Valerian, on the other hand, I think will do well at some of those European countries, especially France, because that's where Luc Besson is from. I think it'll do really well in Japan, China, kind of those markets. So I think Valerian actually might win the international box office that weekend. Dunkirk will be a close second, with Spider-Man also in there. So yeah, at least that's at the overseas. Now here in the States, we kind of already went over that. But in the meantime here, I do think this is a solid opening for Spider-Man Homecoming. It's a definite sign that, yes, if Sony and Marvel work together, they can make not only a great film, in fact, I thought the best film so far in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but they can also really collaborate on this and do a really great movie. And now I think the box office really signifies that, yes, the audience interest was there, even though to a degree, it feels like Spider-Man has been played out, but still, money talks, so I think that's a great result. So in second place was Despicable Me 3, that fell 53%, which means that most of the family audiences were out and about to see it its opening weekend and over the 4th of July holiday. And then maybe, Spider-Man also appeals to that family audience too, and it's only PG-13, so it wasn't too rough for him or anything. That number, I think, is not, it's not a terrible number. And it's definitely, I think, going to be one of the lowest grossing in the series here in the States. But I think worldwide it's doing okay. Baby Driver dropped off another 38%, which is actually a little bit higher than I thought. I thought it would be like 35, maybe 30% drop. I happen to see it this weekend. I'll get my review on it here in a minute. But yeah, here in the States, it's already close to 60 million off of a $34 million budget. That's really good. And then once you factor in the overseas, which I don't think it's opened everywhere yet, but it's now over 70 million worldwide. So yeah, it's definitely made its money back, and it'll be very profitable very soon here. Wonder Woman continues to just blast those expectations. Still 10 million in its sixth weekend. That's incredible. It was only off 35%. It's getting close to 370 million here in the States, and it has now, at least here in the domestic box office, it has now cracked the top 10 all time of the superhero films. So now it's past Deadpool from last year, which, was a huge, huge monster of a movie there. There's a big question here. Does it have enough gas left in the tank to pass Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2? Right now, that one's at 385.5 million here in the States. I think it'll be close. I think Wonder Woman will probably now top 380 million. It's just if it can hold on for the next 2 or 3 weeks. As long as it's in the top 10 in the next 2 or 3 weeks, then I think it has a good shot. It's easily going to pass Spider-Man 2 to take up at least the number 9 spot here, all-time domestically here in the States. Now, we'll see how Spider-Man Homecoming does next weekend. I mean, it's got Apes to deal with, and here in the States, I think Apes will be number 1, unless Spider-Man only drops, like 45, 50%, and Apes doesn't do as well. That would be the only case where I think Spider-Man repeats. So, if it does repeat, though, and it's another 60 million next weekend, that'll probably bring it close to 200 million. But it's Spider-Man, I think, will be the third highest grossing between these 3 titles as far as superhero movies this summer. I mean, who could have predicted that, though? Who could have predicted that Wonder Woman was going to be, still making 10 million plus 6 weekends into release? Okay, we've also got Transformers The Last Night, just barely in the top 5. Cars 3 was pretty close there, too. 6.3 million for Transformers in its third weekend. That's here in the States. It's just under 120 million here in the States. And that accounts for less than a quarter of its worldwide gross, which is a definite sign that it is not going to carry on here in the States and become a big hit. No way. And it's just under 500 million now at the worldwide box office. And we factored in, Spider-Man Homecoming overseas this weekend, plus Apes next weekend, plus Valerian and Dunkirk the weekend after that. We kind of talked about this last week. Transformers is in trouble. And I think overall it probably cost them, after marketing and everything, close to $500 million, maybe just a tad bit over or under that. If it was under, then yeah, they have broken even at this point, but it's not going to be a huge profit film for Paramount. Paramount was also behind Baywatch, which is also, kind of a struggle. Baywatch, in the meantime, has now cracked over $100 million outside of the U.S., but, it's a movie that cost them like $70 million or something. Here in the States, it's kind of a flop. Overseas, it's not going to be a huge moneymaker for them. So Paramount is really struggling this summer. Okay, we can also mention there's a couple of smaller movies that have cracked the top 10 here. The Big Sick cracked the top 10 this weekend. That's from Lionsgate, kind of an independent little romantic comedy. 3.6 million in 326 theaters, and it's made almost $7 million here in limited release. That's, for a summertime movie, that's really great. It hasn't opened anywhere to where I'm able to see it yet, but I'm very much looking forward to seeing it. I think it'll actually enter wide release this weekend or the weekend after. It'll be very, very soon here to where more people can see it. But for now, it's doing very well. Also, The Beguiled is in the top 10. It was number 8 last weekend. It's number 10 this weekend. Still doing $2 million in 900 theaters. So that one isn't quite as outstanding, but still, it's probably going to crack that 1,000 theater count here next weekend. And it's made about $7.5 million. Not a very expensive picture, and it's from Sofia Coppola. She won the Best Director award at Cannes this year. Yeah, I think that prestige factor, plus the cast of Nicole Kidman and Kirsten Dunst and all them, Colin Farrell, I think that draws in a bit of the crowd too, but it's done pretty well. So yeah, those two are in the top 10 there, and yeah, I guess that's all we got for this weekend's box office report. All right, and one film that a lot of people love this summer, that some people are calling the best film of the year, the best film of the summer, Baby Driver. I finally got a chance to see it this weekend. Here is my review. While not every moviegoer out there goes along with the style of Edgar Wright, there is little doubt that he makes his films as entertaining as possible, even for those not taken with his choices. For his latest film, Baby Driver, there are many elements of the film that again fall into this category. From being an action heist film to a flat-out comedy to a Tarantino movie to a romance film, Baby Driver has a bit of everything to it. and it's a very entertaining ride start to finish. The film follows Baby, a getaway driver with tinnitus, who works for Doc, who commits several robberies in the Atlanta area. The two come in dealings after Baby stole several very expensive items from him, but he's soon going to be even with Doc. One day after a job, Baby meets Deborah, a waitress who works at Bo's Diner in Atlanta, and he becomes infatuated with her. After seemingly completing his tasks and getting even with Doc, the day inevitably comes when Doc asks him to drive for him again on a new job. But now he knows Baby's vulnerable love interest will be insurance if he fails. But as this new job comes closer and closer, Baby plans to take himself and Deborah out of Atlanta. But can he before it's too late? First off, I have to compliment the script by Wright. The dialogue is endlessly quippy, and as I mentioned before, it definitely feels like a Tarantino film at times, with just how fast the delivery is, especially from Kevin Spacey's Doc. Really, there's some wonderful lines here that will be remembered for some time. Of course, one of the biggest elements about making a film like this work is, do the action scenes work? The answer, yes. The car choreography is terrific. Also, once the film gets into the romantic angle, does that work? Answer is also yes. Lily James is a good foil for Ansel Elgor's Baby, and the two look great together on screen, and also deliver performances that match the characters perfectly. The chemistry together, also very nice. It's not going to go down as one of the best romances of all time or anything like that, but for a subplot in an action comedy, you could do worse. While we're on performances, I really enjoy Jamie Foxx's Bats, the craziest and most on edge of Doc's thugs who do the heisting before Baby drives them back. He's the type of character that you love to hate. Also doing nice work as the thug characters are John Hamm in his best role since Mad Men as Buddy, and his squeeze and fellow thug Darling played by Isa Gonzalez. And here's another thing, even though the thugs look different and have different styles and their names are only mentioned a few times in the film, I remember their names, just like I remember Doc's name. Deborah and Baby's names are used constantly, so those are given. Also great is C.J. Jones as Baby's foster father who's deaf. Their sign language communication not only serves as a nice break from the more quippy dialogue that's spoken orally, but it's a different angle to take things. Jones's character Joseph has to feel the vibrations of the music on the speaker to get what Baby's listening to. So yes, Baby is constantly listening to music throughout the film, and another key element is what he's listening to great music. Hell yes. A really awesome soundtrack that's a really good mix of rock and roll, love songs, and quieter songs from the 60s to the 80s, which is what I listened to, so yeah, I really did like the soundtrack. As far as complaints go, I just have a few. First off, there are times when the sound mix isn't very good. For example, the first time we meet Bats, Baby's doing a job. And while on the job, there's a moment where he and his fellow thugs are communicating with each other as well as trying to help Baby when things aren't going exactly to plan. The song that Baby's listening to is so loud that it covers up the dialogue, so the whole scene immediately lost my attention because I spent the whole time trying to review what had just been said while trying to differentiate the dialogue from the music, which, as I recall, was a song that had a lot of lyrics to it. There's maybe one or two more brief moments like that later in the movie, but that one in particular stood out and really hurt. Also, there's a moment toward the end where Baby is going up against an enemy that takes a while, and the person he's fighting has already taken on gunshots, multiple hits from punches and hits from tools, yet they're still fighting full force, and realism felt like it just went out the window for the final fight sequence. One more thing, I felt the first half of the movie had a nice pace going, where we weren't hanging around on a particular scene for too long. Then, in the second half, there were a few scenes that do feel a bit draggy. The dialogue makes up for it for the most part, but two scenes, I won't spoil here, really stuck out to me as slow scenes. Really, other than those smaller nitpicks, I don't have much to complain about here. Edgar Wright has pulled off an action comedy that excels at the action parts and doesn't forget it's a comedy. There's also the nice romance between James and Elgore's characters to keep you interested if you're not into the action or comedy scenes, and the sense of fighting for those two so they can be together and away from these robberies. It's really just a nice feeling. Overall, I was very satisfied with the film, which, when it hits, is anything but a slow ride. My rating is a 9 out of 10. Well, I guess that's going to do it for today's edition of the Plagmanrules Podcast. We'll be back again on Friday. We've got Apes coming out this weekend. I am really looking forward to it. I was really looking forward to Spider-Man last weekend. That turned into one of the best films I've seen so far this year. Let's see. Apes has a lot of hype living up to it. Some really great reviews. I'm really looking forward to it. Okay, we got a couple of other housekeeping things to keep in mind here. If you have any ideas or comments about the show that you think would improve the show or something you want to see on the show, you can leave a comment here on YouTube. Otherwise, I have a Gmail account set up. That's plagmanrulespodcast@gmail.com. That's PLAGMANRULES podcast@gmail.com. Also, it's a great place if there's a discussion point you want brought up. Like there's a particular subject or topic that you've thought of recently that's movie or TV related or entertainment related. You're like, hey, what do you think about this? Or what would you do if you had this, that, kind of ideas like that. I'm always open to suggestions like that. So you can go ahead and leave, again, a comment here on YouTube, or you can leave a email at that Gmail account. So yeah, we'll be back again on Friday. I plan to see War for the Planet of the Apes this Thursday night, and we'll have the review ready for Friday if everything goes to plan. And yeah, once again, really looking forward to that film, and we'll see what else happens this week. We'll get into some other big news stories. If not, then we do have San Diego Comic-Con coming up, so maybe I'll do another preview, kind of like what we did last time with the D23 preview. We might do a preview of Comic-Con later on in the week, or maybe early next week. All right, until then, this has been the Plagman Rules Podcast.